Aside from a few of Putin's poodles who are not in their seats in this chamber here.
During the debate on defence and security, the leader of the SNP described Reform UK MPs as Putin's puppets.
Let's watch the amazing SNP MP Stephen Flynn's fantastic takedown of Starmer and Reform UK when, after the Prime Minister Keir Starmer had given what is quite possibly the most important speech of his leadership on defence spending on Tuesday the 25th of February 2025, where Starmer said that he would be cutting foreign aid. Well, clearly SNP leader Stephen Flynn wasn't a happy bunny.
Aside from a few of Putin's poodles who are not in their seats in this chamber here today, we are of course united in our support for the people of Ukraine and indeed in wishing the Prime Minister well in his discussions with the President of the United States later this week. But I'm afraid that's where the unity ends, because whilst we support increasing defence spending, we cannot support the populist playbook of cutting foreign aid. Indeed, that's a position which was shared and agreed with by the Foreign Secretary just a matter of days ago, when he said that it would be a big strategic mistake that would allow China to step in. Why was the Foreign Secretary wrong and the Prime Minister right?
Prime Minister.
Well, let me thank him for his support on the question of Ukraine. That is important. And just to reassure him, the decision that I've taken today on development aid is not an ideological decision. I absolutely understand the importance of it. It's a very difficult and painful decision, but a necessary decision. He talks about choice. They welcomed the biggest settlement since devolution in the budget, but they voted against it because they couldn't take a choice. He welcomes the increase in defence spending, but he doesn't want to say how he will fund it. Choices, grown-up choices about the future of Europe require grown-up decisions and choices, and that is what we've done.
Now, I'll get to both a statement about making grown-up decisions and all that later on, and oh, you'll love what I've got in store for you. But before that, as you saw earlier, our Neanderthal took exception to what Stephen Flynn said, calling them Putin's poodles, remember? Because later on, he did a point of order about this and had a good cry about it.
During the debate on defence and security, the leader of the SNP described Reform UK MPs as Putin's puppets, and that they were missing from the debate. This is not true. I was present for the Prime Minister's statement, left for a comfort break and returned for the rest of the debate. In fact, I've been in this chamber now nearly 4 hours today. Funnily enough, when I returned to the chamber, Madam Deputy Speaker, the leader of the SNP, or none of his MPs, were actually present. The leader of the SNP has misled the House and should apologise if you can find him.
I'm grateful for the honourable member for giving notice of his point of order. However, that point of order was slightly longer than what he provided notice of, and I no doubt he's also let the member know that he was speaking about him. And the honourable member should know that it's not appropriate to be accusing other members of misleading the House. Now, as ever, it is vital that members on all sides maintain good temper and moderation in debate.
Now, what I found interesting about his roaring here was the fact that he actually brought it up. Now, he was there for both Starmer and Badenoch's speeches. Then he left either before or during Keir Starmer's reply to Ed Davies' question. And while he was there, showed little interest in partaking in possibly one of the most important debates in modern times, I suppose you could say, when he was there. Now, this comfort break he spoke about lasted about half an hour plus. Then he suddenly appeared as Lib Dem MP Victoria Collins stood up to ask her question. Must have been a cracking meal he was having then. And he just continued, just sit there, didn't partake again, and showed very little interest, if any. Clearly, Twitter was far more appealing then. Now, do you remember when these cretins said that they were going to shake up UK politics while they were in the House of Commons? I bet I know what he was shaking during his comfort break, eh? Also, let's be honest here, Neanderthal, he didn't mention you by name, you utter cretin. He called you all Putin poodles. So how's Stephen Flynn misled the House? You are Putin's poodles, so... I know I'm only being a bit facetious, but you know what I mean. But anyway, enough about these complete morons. What I love about Stephen Flynn is that he asks very good questions, doesn't he, when he gets the chance. Here he started with unity, saying we all stand with Ukraine and all that, and we are all united on that. He then took the piss out of Refuck and then stuck the boot in on Starmer and showed that clearly the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary are at odds on this, doesn't he? Now, when it comes to foreign aid, I will be honest, I don't know enough about it, the pros and cons of foreign aid, because it's not a hill I've ever been wanting to die on. And what I mean by that is I'm not somebody who's ever thought, we should look after our own and we should do away with foreign aid. It's not really something I've really had a strong opinion about. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, I don't know. But when I don't know enough about something, it's not something I do, go and listen to re-fucking Tory grifters. I listen to experts.
20 minutes after 10 is the time. Bulama is in Lambeth. This is your field of expertise. What do I do now? Do I turn the microphone off, put my feet up and pour myself a cup of tea?
No, James, that's piling pressure on me, but very nice to speak to you again.
Likewise. So where are we?
Yeah, James, I think the first thing to say is that it's a false choice because, you have an English proverb that you always use the stick and carrot.
Yes.
And using soft power and hard power, they go together. And in the West, in Europe, you can use hard power, military power, increase in defense spending to protect the UK from Russia and maybe other enemies. But the only way you protect the UK's interests and promote UK values in the Middle East, in Africa, is through soft power. You don't deploy American servicemen there. You don't deploy, the military equipment there. So what you do is to establish stronger relationships with the governments and especially with the people. And I am a good example of soft power because growing up in northern Nigeria, the first thing you get introduced to in terms of media is the BBC local service, local language service,
yes,
which introduces news and concepts and arguments through a Western lens, and then that helps you promote the Western understanding of things. It helps you to promote things like the English Premier League, which is the most popular in West Africa or even in Africa generally, and just promote Western interests and Western values. And I think...
And why is that to our benefit? I'm going to be the devil's advocate here. Some of the questions I ask you, I might have my own answers to. But if I was listening to this, the fellow who we've just popped into Idiot's Corner, we are no longer an empire. We are no longer the player on the world stage that we used to be. Why is this our concern? The BBC perhaps notwithstanding, why on earth should the tax pounds of somebody in Blackpool be spent on looking after or providing anything at all to somebody in Nigeria?
Yeah, so it's not completely aid. We call it aid, but there are benefits to the UK. For example, you do have UK companies operating in Nigeria, oil companies, for example, and other companies, a lot of whose profit comes back to the UK. And when you have people and governments that are friendly to the UK, or UK's values, then you will have your own companies operating in those countries, and then you can reap the profit. For example, over the last 2 years, 3 Sahelian countries, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, turned to the military, and in 2 of the countries, the military took over a few months after they have been trained in Russia.
So there's a little bit of...
Immediately,
carry on.
They kicked out French companies, they kicked out the Americans, they kicked out the governments, and also started then to clamp down on Western companies in those countries and started giving preference to Russia. And that's happening in 3 Sahelian countries right now, and there are moves right now in places like Senegal, like Chad, to expel the French. And this will happen to the UK in places where UK has more interest. For example, China is right now investing heavily in Africa's telecommunication and rail and road. And what that means is they can exploit data from African countries. They can, control other things on the continent. And the last thing I would mention on this question, James, in addition to commercial interests, is diplomatic weight in the international scene. We saw last 2 years when 15 African countries either abstained or voted in favor of Russia, and that was record-breaking at the time when Russia invaded Ukraine. And then we saw 17 countries, and now the U.S. is voting with Russia, like you discussed 2 days ago.
Yes.
And now that will give more license to other countries to side with Russia and with China against the West at the international community, especially in the United Nations and other international platforms where important discussions are going on.
Two thoughts. The first a little odd, perhaps, which is given that the current US administration votes with Russia now, there's not much point worrying about the much less influential African nations.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that for now, but the problem is that if you have, let's say, 150 countries voting,
yes.
Russia has one vote, the US has one vote. And if you have 15 African countries voting with you, unless it is in the Security Council, then the majority carries the votes, because it's not like a weighted vote where the US or Russia has more. But the point is that if you have this being, for example, what Trump is doing, perhaps the only other country that may then now claim the high moral ground in terms of Western values and interests would be the UK. And if you are then taking aid away, and it's not just aid, remember that this aid budget goes to diplomacy, it goes to culture, it goes to media, then it goes to promotion of Western
so there's so much. It's such a huge umbrella, isn't it? And I mean, if we were dealing with the more mercantile critics of foreign aid, you'd be able to point out in many ways a lot of it involves speculating to accumulate. As you've talked about commercial opportunity and commercial interests, that would be why Russia would be interested in sponsoring regime change so that it can pile in and help itself to the resources and the minerals, which, of course, a lot of people listening are now going to be hearing echoes of Donald Trump's rhetoric with regard to Ukraine and even Greenland. So soft power provides defences against military actions that may end up having enormous economic costs for the UK or more broadly the West.
Yeah, exactly, James. And so when you have this happening at a time when the UK and the US and other Western countries were already receding from Africa and the Middle East, and other actors who are seen as the enemies stepping up, then you would worry. And to be honest, for example, in Kano, when I started studying for my degree, the most conspicuous place or thing you would see close to the Emir of Kano's palace is British Council. Yes. Which has the British flag. They learn British literature, and that introduces you to British literature, British politics, British way of thinking. And there is no way on earth you would say that's not important, because if it is not important, then you wouldn't see Russia, for example, now strengthening Russia today, or other countries trying to do their media on the continent. I do think this is a big mistake. Hang
on, I'll get you onto that in a minute. I just want to point out that that bit of your analysis somewhat spikes the guns of criticism from the left when they talk about colonialism and things like that, because it's not a question of removing Western influence and Western investment in order to allow these countries to, quote, stand on their own 2 feet. It's a question of replacing partnership with the West with partnership with Russia or China.
Yeah, and then also
which is obviously against our interests.
Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates to occupy places where they previously would not. And Russia
creating refugees, creating carnage, creating terrorist and sponsorships.
And James, this is happening at a time that is already difficult, because Russia and China are malign actors. They use conspiracy, they spread conspiracy and disinformation on the continent. They use regime support packages. When I was at the Tony Blair Institute 3 years ago, we wrote a paper which is still on the Tony Blair Institute's website, analyzing Russia's efforts on the African continent. And we looked at soft power, we looked at education, we looked at their regime support package, which is helping African dictators. And when you have those kinds of dictators supported by Russia, then British companies have no chance, and therefore British commercial interests on the continent will be impacted.
But what about the ratio between carrot and stick? I register that you think this is a mistake, and I have a much better understanding of why than I did before you started talking. But there is a reprioritisation in place here. I mean, it is a consequence of what Donald Trump has said and done, that the UK government has concluded it needs to spend more money on defence spending, and the simple calculation that is the place we're going to get it from can be regrettable and suboptimal, but also inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, the shame, James, recently is that government no longer see themselves as the institutions that should be trying to articulate their points in order to sway public opinion in their favor. For example, when the anti-migrant rhetoric starts, instead of the Labour government to argue on the importance of migration and the real benefits it will bring both commercially and socially to the UK, it starts to then pander to Reform and Kemi Badenoch's Conservative Party. And that's what is happening here. It's important to increase defence spending, but the way you do that is to explain the importance, articulate the importance of this increase, and try to get the British public to buy into that by perhaps
so chicken and egg. It's so because
more tax.
Yes, except that the context in which this can be relatively uncontroversial and relatively popular is the context you've just nailed, where the liars have prevailed. Whether it's about immigration or whether it's about foreign aid. The media and some politicians have created a false reality in which people think this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, but James, the government has the biggest microphone in the country, and they can try to articulate their own point. But then what's happening here is that,
I don't think they do. I think I'm just going to jump on that because it's one of the very first times I've disagreed with you. I don't think they do have the biggest microphone in the country. I think Rupert Murdoch does.
We could say that, but Rupert Murdoch is looking for content from the government. And to be honest, I feel Keir Starmer is a very articulate person, and if he believed in this thing and he tries to articulate it, people will get it, especially. But then they say, the easiest thing to do is to take something that doesn't go directly to the taxpayer or to the voters, and that's a budget, because all of us are in the UK and we don't know.
And the chickens, if and when these chickens come home to roost, it's so far distant, both chronologically and geographically, that the pragmatic rationale for what he's done makes perfect sense. No? Yeah.
And so the point is that if you took aid budgets to increase defence budget, what you are doing is to protect UK's immediate interest in Europe better, but open
there
UK.
And it's not necessarily either or.
Wide open.
But the more you accept of it being either or, the less controversial the decision becomes. Thank you. Good Lord, you're good. What are you up to at the moment? How can people find out more about them? Because I always get bombarded every time you come on. It's very bad for my ego. I get bombarded with messages about how brilliant you are and how I should just shut up and listen, which I hope I've done. But how can people find out more about the work that you're doing? Are you still writing your column in Daily Trust?
I mean, I no longer write the column in Daily Trust. Most of the work I do right now, James, is rehabilitating former ISIS fighters in East Africa. And my latest work is...
I just said you were making me feel inadequate.
Yeah, we do have a rehabilitation center in Kampala, which I help oversee. And I will be traveling there in about 2 weeks. We just received about 46 new ISIS defectors in East Africa, and working to rehabilitate them psychologically, ideologically, and try to teach them some skills and then give them some capital to earn a livelihood back home. I mean, most of them are low-profile fighters, teenagers who have been either tricked or abducted into the group and profiled by governments before they came to us. So my most recent thing is working on a paper explaining that, and hopefully it will be published recently. And
well, keep us posted. And of course, I don't think I need to point out that the work you've just described would be largely funded and subsidised by what we call foreign aid.
Yeah, I mean, not particularly my own, but I know others do. I mean, I work for a private charity, so there is this. It's a capital management firm that gives us 50% of their profit to do this work. It's an American capital management firm called Bridgeway Capital Management. And when the guy started, he then set up a charity arm called Bridgeway Foundation, and they give us 50% of their profit to do this work. So we have never taken anything from the UK government or Europe at all. We use our own money to do the work.
Long may that continue. As commercially speaking, he's swimming against the Elon Musk tide, isn't he, in terms of ideology and impact. Thank you, and let us know when that paper gets published. I may even understand some of it.
Sure, thank you so much. You are very kind, James.
You're brilliant, and you know you are. Bulama Bakati, who has done so much, as you've just gathered, including working at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change and the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, but now actually doing incredibly important work on the ground, the kind of work that you could loosely describe as soft power, albeit that in this case not funded directly by foreign aid.
Now, sorry for the long call, but I thought what he had to say was absolutely brilliant, and I learned so much. Also, I wasn't even going to try and attempt to mention his name because I know I would butcher it and I won't do him justice. And like I said earlier, when it came to foreign aid, I've always been cool with it, and let's be honest here, we don't do this through the goodness of our own heart, do we? We do foreign aid for selfish needs, don't we? You know, like soft power, carrot and stick and stuff like that. So for me, when Starmer said that this requires grown-up decisions, is cutting foreign aid a grown-up decision? I don't think so. Feels a little bit of a gutless decision for me, you know. It feels to me as though he took the easy option and trying again to pander to racist re-fucking Tory voters, but probably will never vote for them anyway. And I have a funny feeling it could possibly alienate those who would vote for them, who understand the positives of foreign aid and also feel that it should be more as well. You know what I mean? We should pay more as well. But what do you guys think? Let me know down below. And if you enjoy everything House of Commons and select committee meetings, give us a like and subscribe, and I shall bid you farewell and take care, my friends.